AI is bringing the cost of creating anything down to zero. We're seeing a flood of content. We're seeing a flood of information that's being produced. And the ability to use AI to craft useful, interesting content that captures people's attention, like that requires taste. As humans, we have to figure out like what are the things that are worth doing? What are the problems worth solving? Their level one use cases almost always are have it read and write your emails, have it write your talking points. And that's like using AI like $10 an hour intern, which is almost like as silly as having a Ferrari and driving it to the grocery store. It's like, yeah, sure, you can do that, but it's like, that's not what a Ferrari was built for, right? Understanding how to use AI to help you make better decisions and how to frame the right questions to turn it into kind of your sparring partner, your thinking partner. Learning how to use AI like a $700 an hour consultant is the real unlock.
Danoosh, welcome to the show, man.
Hi, Misbah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like I first discovered your work on LinkedIn, and I remember somebody recommending your profile. It was maybe somebody from the private equity world or venture capitalist world. I don't remember, but it was like, oh, you need to follow this guy if you are learning about AI and you know, getting yourself up to a good standard. And I just really love the way that you are talking strategy, talking about the educational aspect of it. And so it's an honor to have you on. And yeah, tell us a little bit about your background, because you have quite an interesting background before you dove into this. Yeah, give us a quick run through.
Quite a multidisciplinary background. So, you know, I started my career as an industrial engineer, crawling around refineries, chemical plants, you know, and wearing Nomex in the Gulf Coast, and didn't really love it. But you know, I was kind of an immigrant from India and had to do what I had to do to get a visa and a sponsorship. And then I moved to San Francisco, and you know, it was probably like the last round of startup wave. I mean, the last startup wave that was around the like 2009 2010 timeframe. And yeah, I landed in San Francisco, and there was all of these really exciting startups, and you know, people kind of building out new ideas and things like that. And I was like, oh, I got to get into this startup game. This seems like way more fun, way more kind of forward leaning. And so I joined General Assembly, which is an ed tech company. And back in the day, we kind of pioneered the whole bootcamp movement of like taking you from zero to employable, you know, web developer, product manager, UX designer in 90 days. And yeah, so I kind of joined as part of the early team there and helped to build and scale it. We eventually had a pretty successful exit. And then at that point, we were having our first kid, and I couldn't, you know, be traveling 80% of the time and working 18-hour days. And so I ended up joining IDEO, which is the design consulting firm. And I joined a small team there to start IDEO U, which was IDEO's online learning platform, where we kind of harnessed all of the great thinking, all of the great knowledge from around the firm and turned it into educational content that anyone could learn from. And we did that all digitally, so that was all online learning, and that really took off. You know, there's a lot of people that wanted to learn IDEO's methods and ways to innovate, and so that took off. And after a couple of years, I got, you know, I kind of got into that world of innovation and design thinking, and I loved it. And then I joined a smaller firm. And you know, helped to turn it around, make it more digital, you know, kind of push it into the future, if you would.
Yeah.
And that was a ton of fun. And you know, that kind of took me into like the traditional world of consulting, spending like Monday to Thursday on the road, and you know, you're dealing with a finance company one day, and you're dealing with a healthcare company the next week. And I love that. I love that, the whole, you know, being able to apply methods and frameworks across industries, across different business problems, across, you know, developing strategies and things like that. And then the pandemic hit, and you know, one thing led to another, and I ended up leaving that firm unfortunately, things didn't go great through the pandemic, as with many smaller firms. And then I kind of went out on my own, and then shortly after that, I got involved with I just started tinkering around with ChatGPT when it initially came out, and I started as most people do with like writing rap songs and like silly
Yeah.
stuff like that, and then yeah, I just got really curious about it, and immediately, like the first time I touched it, I was like, "Oh, this is a whole different ball game. This is technology like we've never seen before. Like we can interact with it. You can interact with it, like a human." And yeah, and then my friends were like, "We don't quite understand this, and can you like teach a workshop?" And I've been doing workshops forever, and so I started teaching my friends and colleagues, and I started running these little workshops, and one thing led to another, and then an old friend, an old coworker from General Assembly called me and was like, "Hey, um, we're putting together a long form course around AI. There's nothing like quite out there that crystallizes how to use this technology to actually get tangible results." And so that was like kind of my first real project to like put something down on paper, crystallize knowledge, build a course around it. There was multiple people in the course, and we built a really successful course called AI Prompting in partnership with a company called Ziplines Education. And yeah, it's been super popular since it came out. And we put probably over 100 people a week through it.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I feel like the rate of technology is just it's moving so quickly. I feel like before it was like every 3 to 5 years or so there would be some revolutionary shift, and now I
Yeah.
think I heard that it's about 7 months now. Like AI development every 7 months or so is
Yeah.
completely different. New sets of tools, new.
Completely different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm so
No.
curious that I mean, you've seen these shifts from like stage one
Yeah.
of testing this
Yeah.
out. From your perspective, what has that been like? Or, every 7 months, or just the rate of change that you've been experiencing?
Yeah, the rate of change is insane, right? And so if you kind of take a step back and look at previous revolutions, so if we go all the way back to the Industrial Revolution, that was a democratization of power. So if you think about it, it was like the amount of work it would take 100 horses to do was done by a 100 horsepower motor, right? And that change was kind of linear change. It was change that happened, but it happened over a long period of time, and there was time to adapt to that change. And then the next revolution that came around was really the digital revolution, which was the arrival of computers and smartphones and the internet and so on and so forth. And that took us on like an exponential path, right, where the rate of change started accelerating, and we were starting to see the compression of how long you had to adapt to that change. And now with the arrival of AI, it's like almost quantum, right? It's almost like straight up, where the changes are rapid, they're instantaneous, and pretty widespread. Um, and that's something that like is really hard to adapt to, right? I think that's something that all of us are struggling with, is just adapting to this like rapid rate of change where when you work in AI, like oftentimes you'll be working on a project, you might spend like a couple of weeks on it, and then a new model comes out, something changes, and all of a sudden it's like, pff, that's gone. You gotta like redo it. And this is particularly challenging when you're developing a course, right? Because like
Yeah.
back in the day, it used to take when I was at IDEO U, it would take us like several months to develop a course, and we would send people out into the field and spend like $1 million on putting together a course. And then when we were doing it with Ziplines, like I think we put together the whole course in a matter of weeks. It was shot in my home office. It was edited using AI. Like it was a completely different ballgame, right? And and what we found was like by the time we put that course together, a new model had come out and like everything had shifted, and we were like, oh my god, like what do we do here? But we kind of baked that into the design, and we said like we'll keep the video stuff kind of classical, the stuff that isn't going to change rapidly over time, and then we built in live lessons every week where we really talk about like the latest and greatest and bring in the new stuff that's coming in and the changes that are happening, and be able to like react to that in real time, and that worked really well.
I'm so curious. What's your view on the like how this is going to shift education and how we learn things in general? Because, like you're saying, that we kind of experience a little bit in the last 10, 20 years in colleges, right? Where it's like you're
Yeah.
going through your degree, and then by the time you're done your degree, it's like a whole new world. And it takes time for
Yeah.
the textbooks to be written and updated and all those things to kind of make its way into curriculums. Like, how is AI going to impact larger scale education and how we've thought about learning in the past? Do you feel like it's going to stay very similar because it's just so ancient, or are there changes coming?
No, I think education is probably one of the fields that's going to be transformed pretty significantly by the arrival of AI. And I think when I think about how it's going to transform, I think fundamentally like there's two ways in which it's going to be affected. So I think the first is what AI gives you is it gives you like the right amount of information at the right time when you can apply it. So you don't really need to spend, months or years kind of acquiring a skill and practicing it and then applying it and then learning how to apply it to, a variety of different problems. I think that whole thing is transforming very, very quickly because a this the value of skills is going down quite dramatically, right? Like if you just look at the world of software engineering and you look at how much that has changed over the last just let's say 2 years, forget anything beyond that. The whole vibe coding thing has come about, and at this point, like you can see people who kind of put their hands up and are talking to the AI, and they're not even typing anything, and then the AI is doing all of the coding, right? And so that skill acquisition is less important than it used to be, and the value of that is kind of going down over time, and the value of being able to learn in like bite-sized nuggets and quickly apply that information, that the value of that is going up quickly, right? So I think like that's one kind of fundamental change that we're seeing across the board when you're learning right about anything. And I'll give you, I'll contextualize this in an example in my own world. So when when I kind of went out as a solopreneur, when you're a solopreneur, you got to do everything, and I had to learn a lot about marketing and digital marketing, and I kind of I knew enough going into it, but like to actually be able to create great content that captures attention, that delivers value, like there's a real skill in that, but I didn't need to spend 6 months learning that. I could use ChatGPT to kind of help me, to guide me, to be able to apply frameworks and things like that, and get pretty competent pretty fast, and then get good, and then really good, right? And so that just enough information, just in time, is something that AI is offering us that's super super interesting, and hasn't really happened before.
Oh yeah, and I think this also transforms like how skills will be looked at in general, where there's these hard skills and soft skills. And I'm curious, if we zoom out, let's say the rate of development continues at this speed. Every 7 months, there's something crazy happening. 5 years out, what are you seeing as some of the most sought out skills or mindsets even that will be in demand?
So interestingly, I think like as I said, like I think the value of like tangible skills is going down, but the value of like mindsets and the all of the things that go into adaptability and rapid learning, like those are the things that are becoming more and more important. So I remember when I graduated college, like if you had a computer science degree, like you were golden, right? Like you came to the valley, and you were pretty much guaranteed like a high paying job, and plenty of opportunity, and that was you had to have that skill, right? And it was a skill that had to be developed over a long period of time. And now we can see with vibe coding, like the value of that skill is dropping quite quickly, and you can see that in the number of job openings for software engineers, so on and so forth, right? Like a lot of companies are reducing the job openings and future hiring plans and all of that. Whereas when I was graduating college, it was like if you had a CS degree, like Google would just hire you, right?
Right.
Just like picking up all the talent they could find.
Yeah.
So I think the things like one skill that I think is going to get really important is a sense of taste. And when I mean a sense of taste is like the ability to know what is good, what is resonant, what's going to work with a particular audience or a subset of people. And that's something that is honed over a period of time, right? It's a sensibility. It's not necessarily something that you can read a textbook on and apply a process or method or a framework. It's much more intangible. It's much more something that you pick up and you make your own and you hone over a sense of time. And having a steady stream of inspiration is really necessary to kind of hone that skill. And that's something that like I've brought into my own practice is like, kind of having ways to capture inspiration. And when I come across a great piece of content, whether I save it immediately, and then I think about like, well, what about this like spoke to me? Was it something about the filming? Was it something about the editing? Was it something about kind of the visuals? Was it something about like the content? Like what was it that like really spoke to me and caught my attention and made me engage with this? I think so. That's a sense of taste is going to be really important because as we can see, like, AI is bringing the cost of creating anything down to zero, right? Or at least in the digital world. And so we're seeing a flood of content. We're seeing a flood of information that's being produced. And a lot of, there's a lot of criticism around like AI slop. Or that kind of mass produced generic soulless content, right? And the ability to use AI to craft useful, interesting content that captures people's attention, like that requires taste. And that's a skill that I think is going to become increasingly important. And the ability to curate, right? When you have so many options and the AI can just like produce, the ability to edit and curate and create a vibe and a sensibility, like those things are really important, right? And then I think the other thing that I'm seeing is like there's a pretty solid pendulum shift from like specialist work to like generalist work, right? So the people that that are generalists that can wear multiple hats, like one of my favorite books is David Epstein's book on generalists. I'm blanking on the name right now, but I'll send that to you.
I think I know what you're talking about
And
too. It's not the
yeah.
it's not the talent code, right? Or is it?
No, I'm blanking on the name. It's like,
We'll make sure to get it linked up in the description.
yeah. And he talks about how generalists, because they're able to wear multiple hats and do multiple things, are able to spot, underlying patterns and make quick shifts as things change. Like generalists have kind of a purview of the landscape, and as that landscape shifts, they can adapt quickly to that shifting landscape. I think that's becoming more and more important, right? Like back in the day, there wasn't even like a couple of years ago, there were no like generalist job postings. Like you would have a job posting for, product manager or UX designer or digital marketer. We wouldn't have like a generalist job posting. But now you're starting to see like these generalist roles crop up, like XIR, expert in residence, people that can do marketing, they can do sales, they can do product, right? And they can kind of shift and change as necessary, kind of bring those skills together to bear on a problem.
Yeah, I think I heard Sam Altman say this, but he was like, the only thing that you should specialize in the day you become an entrepreneur is being a generalist. And so
Yeah.
previously, I feel like being a generalist was only something, the outlet for it was maybe entrepreneurship or
Yeah.
solopreneurship. There
Yeah.
wasn't anything else that would allow you to maybe fully express all your skills and, abilities. But what you're saying now is there's this shift where it's almost like the entrepreneurial talent or the
Yeah.
mindset is what's being sought
Mindset.
out for. It's like
Yeah.
the companies don't want people who are starting their own companies. What they want is somebody who has those skills, but they don't feel like going through the hassle of starting their own thing, right? They want to exert all that effort, under maybe their umbrella. It seems like.
Yeah. And for anyone who's ever worked at a startup, you know that like you need those generalist skills. You need to be able to kind of work across different domains and different disciplines and things like that. Like that's where the magic is.
100%. I'm also curious because you talked about taste, right? There is this kind of sentiment right now around, okay, so ChatGPT can give us lots of options, like you said, and it's very confident when it gives you what it gives you, right? Like
Yeah.
it thinks that it's the best thing ever. And
Yeah.
so I think the level of taste that you're also talking about is the ability to tweak almost like that doesn't feel right. That doesn't sound right,
Exactly.
right? It's like that doesn't
Exactly.
something about that doesn't look right. It's almost
Exactly.
artistic in a nature.
It is artistic. And when you think about the outputs that you get from ChatGPT, they're the statistical mean, right? And so truly creative work that moves people to action or, kind of penetrates the heart or the mind or both, they tend to sit in the peaks and valleys, right? And so the ChatGPT output that you get that might feel bland, like then you got to add your own taste, your own eye, your own sensibilities to kind of move it out of that mean, right, and make it interesting, make it provocative.
And there's still a human that's needed for that part.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Those are the uniquely human skills.
Totally. What do you think the job descriptions or like the job titles will look like in 5 years based on this conversation we're having around skills and mindsets? It's like, do you see, because I've heard this where it's like, there will be lots of jobs that are gone and eliminated because of AI, but there will be lots of new fields and new titles and roles that will be created as a result as well. So I'm just thinking of some of those people who, I mean, let's go with the software engineer type example, right? Job openings are already starting to reflect in what's available and whatnot. 5 years from now, where is that going to be? Where are all the software engineers going to be? How do you suggest somebody prepare for that transition, that pivot? Like, do you think it's going to be a full on pivot, like a lot of people deciding to switch industries completely? Or do you think there will be, just people deepening their skills maybe in their existing roles? Maybe it's a combination of both or none at all, but I'm curious what
Yeah.
your take is on this.
Yeah, so I think as with all things new, there's a lot of hype, and as humans, we tend to fear the things we don't quite understand, and none of us can truly predict what jobs are going to exist in 5 years, which ones are going to stay, which ones are going to go. It's hard to like accurately know that, but what we do know is that AI is getting exceedingly good at the execution of work, right? And it's getting exceedingly good at being able to, bang out some code or design a landing page, right? Like things like that. But as humans, we have to figure out like what are the things that are worth doing? What are the problems worth solving, right? And so I think like if you think about the world of software, the people that just write the code that don't have any involvement in kind of the designing of the system or the product or things like that, like those roles feel like they're more at risk, right? And so kind of leveling up into kind of more architecture,
Mm.
that feels like that's a directional shift, right? So at IDEO, we always talked about having like a T-shaped skill set, which means you had like depth of expertise in like, one domain, but then you had like breadth of expertise across multiple domains. I think it's really about broadening out that top of the T, and being able to like broaden out that skill set. So let's say if you're like a social media marketer, like learning how to create great content is really important, but also learning how to, understanding kind of how campaigns work, and understanding, the design of a campaign, like those sorts of things become more and more important, because the AI will be able to generate content like at greater speed and scale than we ever will, right?
Hmm.
And so being able to understand like, why are we putting this campaign together? Who is this for? What are the things that are important to them? And then how do we use the AI to like help us come up with the right ideas? How do we help it, how do we guide it to create the right content? Like that's the kind of stuff that I think are the jobs that are going to be more in demand, right? So if we think about like a marketing team, it's probably going to be a CMO, a few marketers, and then a lot of AI, right? And so the CMO really needs to know not just how to manage people and and marketing metrics, but also like being able to having like really solid AI chops to know like what to delegate to the AI, what to delegate to a human, how to architect the plan, how to architect the system, how to review outputs, how to see that they're not generic and bland, where to push it, like that sort of stuff is going to become more and more important. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it also sounds like the speed of output is just going to increase. And so it's kind of like when the internet came out, if you decided
Yeah.
you still wanted to use MapQuest instead of typing it into Google, right? It's like you can
Yeah.
still do that, but it's just,
Yeah.
it's slowing things down, and
Yeah.
it's creating a bigger and bigger gap because everyone else is still computing with crazy speed while you're still
Yeah.
doing it in an analog way. And it also
Yeah.
sounds like AI is going to give us all the parts, but we still have to assemble it, right? It's
Yeah.
like you're getting all these fragmented parts, and it's kind of knowing and having the detection skills to go, where does this apply? I think this is going to be, yeah, it's going to be a very interesting world, I think, 5 years from now. I mean, we've seen in just the past 2 years what a
Yeah.
shift this has been. My next question for you is around, like, a lot of people I've been talking to about AI, surprisingly, there is not as much hype around like the tactics, right? I mean, there is in certain corners of the internet, but like I've been surprised that there is a lot more talk around how we're thinking about it, the mindset, the approach.
Yeah.
And I think that is worthwhile after what you've been saying. But could you dive a little deeper into why these mental models and the mindset is kind of now the pendulum is swinging, and that's a little more important than like a quick one-off tactic or a new software that you can deploy, because it seems like there's so many of them, and there's a lot you could also take advantage of. But what's that relationship between tactical stuff versus mindset stuff?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think, firstly, taking a step back and understanding like what's changed is important before we dive into that conversation. So if you think about, the internet era, or kind of that digital era, a lot of technology was single purpose technology, right? And it was very deterministic. So it was a constrained set of rules that that the technology would follow to give you a very predictable, accurate output, right? And that's what we are used to. That's how we've been using technology for the last decade, 2 decades, 3 decades. And with AI, there's a fundamental shift. So, when you think about the old world of technology, that was built on a logical construct, right? It was built, so Salesforce was designed to, you know, give you insight on your customers and manage your customer data, right? But it couldn't write rap lyrics, right? It couldn't write your emails for you, right? But AI can. It can do all of it. And that's a real, for most people, when they first start using AI, that is one of the hardest shifts to kind of understand. With AI, it is built almost on almost on an organic, like biological construct, right?
Yeah.
And when you talk about when you listen to people like the CEO of Anthropic talking about like how these models are developed, it's almost like they're grown in labs, right? And AI's ability to be able to analyze data, create content, solve problems, apply frameworks. This is something that we're just not used to. We're not used to, this general purpose technology that can do it all, right? And at the same time, it's not super predictable, right?
Yeah.
The old world of software was like you were, if you use Excel to like do calculations, you knew for sure that whatever output came out, you could trust that, right? Whereas working with AI is much more like working with a really smart human. And as humans, we make mistakes. We don't. Context really matters in how we receive information, solve problems, communicate. Same applies, right, with AI. And that context problem is something that most people take a really long time to understand. Like you've got to feed AI so much context before it can help you and give you good results, right? And so that shift of going from a logical, predictable way of interacting with software to a much more kind of organic, flexible, creative way of dealing with software is entirely new, right? And so that's kind of at the root of why the mindsets are so much more important than the tactics. So let's take prompting, for example, right? A lot of people who are getting started with AI, they get really intimidated by this whole prompting thing, right? And they think of it as like learning how to code and writing a set of instructions in a language that a machine can understand. And that's really not what it is, right? What prompting is it's really much more an act of communication. It's much more a skill of communication than it is a technical skill. It is really about being able to like frame the right questions, being able to frame a problem out, give enough input to the AI, just like you would kind of give to a human engineer, right? Like if you have an engineer working with you, they're going to ask you a million questions to understand what it is you're trying to get to. And they're going to ask you for a bunch of documents that they can then sift through before they can, create the plan and then create the product. And so I think that's at the core, right, of why the mindsets matter. And then the tactics matter less and less because like the technology is advancing so quickly that like whatever tactics worked, a month ago don't really work anymore. Like even when we take prompting, right? In the early days of prompting, like you really had to follow like some structure. Like you had to start your prompt with URA and call in some expertise, and then you had to be like very specific about the goal and the output, and all of that still holds, right? But with a model like O3, it's really smart, and what matters more is not kind of calling in the expertise, so on and so forth. It's really much more about kind of framing the right problem, right? And giving it enough context and then setting it off to work and letting it do its thing, and then looking at the output, evaluating it critically, looking at what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what feels off, spot checking. Like those are the things that are really, really important, right? So I kind of went on a windy route here, but when you think about frameworks or mental models, they're really an abstraction. So think of it as almost like the way a map is an abstraction of a city or a neighborhood, right? It's kind of tuning out all of the irrelevant, unnecessary details and focusing on the few important things, the main roads, the main markers, the things like that, right? So the same way, having mental models is really important because things are shifting so quickly that you need maps to help you navigate this evolving terrain. You need those signposts, you need those abstractions to help you orient quickly, right? And Charlie Munger was famous for this, right? He basically had around 90 mental models that he felt like that's all he needed to make all of the complex, amazing decisions that he did. And so that's one of the reasons why I think like the mindsets, the frameworks, the mental models, like that sort of stuff is really important. And then it's also a way to communicate with the AI, right? So when you, like, let's say you're working on a strategy and you invoke, like, a strategy framework like Porter's five forces or where to play and how to win. It knows exactly what you're talking about, and then like you and the AI are in sync, right? And it's really freakishly good at applying frameworks. As consultants, we live and die by frameworks, and I feel like AI can apply frameworks oftentimes better than most consultants can. Right now, there's always nuance. There's always a understanding customer needs and changing market conditions and all of that, that still is very much sits with a human strategist. But yeah, that ability for AI to be able to apply a framework to a problem is super powerful. And so knowing which framework to apply is more important than knowing how to apply the framework.
Yeah, and it sounds like this creates this opportunity to like work on problems that would never just get attention back in the day
Yeah.
because you had to go through so many hoops, it had to reach so
Yep.
many people, it needed this much money, and then it almost seems like that became, in a way, like, let's use productivity apps for an example, right? It's like everybody could build or write software, and so everybody chased after maybe the one thing that is easy to make or everybody's using or seems very profitable or gets a lot of funding or whatever. And then there's all these actual like tangible problems that get left behind because all the software engineers, all the developers were all working on like these,
Yep.
the top funded things, right?
Yep.
So I'm curious if that's partly how you can maybe apply some of these mental models where it's like, you know, there's very few moments in history where like you get a chance to care about something and actually deeply contribute to it, right? And I
Yep.
feel like
Yep.
this is one of those moments where why choose something like manufacturing or something boring that like you have no background in, don't have any connection to, and it's just another job versus, can you apply some of what you know and your previous background knowledge using some of these mental models to new problems that like we couldn't even conceive of solving before, because there's an unlimited array of problems that need to be dealt with, and it's
Yeah. I think like as you're talking about this, what's coming up for me is like I feel like we're entering this era of like almost custom built software, right? Where you can, if you have kind of annoying problem that you find yourself kind of going back to the same thing and spending a lot of time on, you can one time sit and unpack it, figure out like how you can kind of solve this problem almost at scale for yourself, and you know build a small automated workflow or build a little app with Lovable or something like that. And this thing that used to take you a lot of time and a lot of like energy to do, you can now offload to the AI, right? And you know what the problem is. You have researched enough to know like what mental models or frameworks to apply. You know what good looks like in an output, right? And so when you create like an automated workflow or you create a little app or something like that to help you kind of solve that thing that you do on a weekly basis or a monthly basis that you're like, I just don't want to do this thing because it's like such a time suck, and there's got to be a better way. You can now do that, right? And you can solve that problem for yourself. And probably if you have that problem, many other people have that problem. Then you go look for like who else has that problem, and then how can you kind of like broaden that out to beyond just like yourself, right? And so I think the way in which software is being developed is going to change quite a bit, right? In that like it's to your point, it's not about going and getting a gargantuan amount of capital and building, spending 2, 3, 4 years building something and then unleashing it to a really large market. Like you can start really small, solve something for yourself, then figure out like, who are the other five people that have this problem, and then can I solve it for them? And then who are the 500 people that have this problem? Can kind of expand out from there. And it's a much better way, right? Because you're essentially building iteratively. You're You have a problem, you solve that problem, it worked for you, then you go out, find it, expand that out. And so the risk of failure is much lower, right? Because you're prototyping, testing, and building.
And would you say that, because of course there's going to be lots more builders if everybody can build, right? It sounds like because it's so cheap to build, that if something fails, it's not kind of the end of the world like it used to be. Like
Yeah,
before, it's like, oh my
it,
gosh, my whole life is over. I spent 10 years
yeah,
on this thing. Now it's like,
yeah.
okay, I
It's like
lost 10
maybe
hours.
you lost a week,
Yeah.
like maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. I'm curious, what do you see as maybe the most underrated skill as we think about like strategic decision making? Because that's, I think, some of what we're talking about with these mental models, with prompting AI and whatnot. It is the ability to make good decisions and to do that kind of at scale. And if you're doing that correctly, it seems like, those decisions will multiply, can multiply very quickly, good or bad. So I'm curious, what do you see as kind of the most underrated skill that contributes to strategic decision making?
So what I find is, like, a lot of people that are getting started with the AI that I'm teaching, their level one use cases almost always are, have it read and write your emails, have it write your talking points, things like that. And that's like using AI, like, $10 an hour intern, um, which is almost like as silly as having a Ferrari and driving it to the grocery store. It's like, yeah, sure, you can do that, but it's like that's not what a Ferrari was built for, right?
Right.
And I think the ability, understanding how to use AI to help you make better decisions and how to frame the right questions to turn it into kind of your sparring partner, your thinking partner. I think that when people realize that, that's a huge leap for most people, and that's when they start to see like the real value of AI, right? Opposed to, the HBR articles that everybody's reading. It's like, oh, I can now tangibly see how this is going to improve my life. Because when you improve this is probably no single leverage point like being able to make better decisions, right? Like learning how to make better decisions just has this massively compounding effect. If you make fewer decisions that go wrong or that you need to like rethink or redo, you just start to see like exponential returns in your life. And so learning how to use AI like a $700 an hour consultant is the real unlock, right? And that's a lot of what I teach people how to do. Is that kind of answering your question?
100%. Yeah. And I think one of the things I'm curious about, there's this quote from, I think his name's Dr. Phil Stutz. He talks about like the three things that are just certainties of life, right? Pain, uncertainty, and constant work. You can always expect all three of those. And so, the one I want to focus on, I think, is uncertainty, because that actually is the one thing in our field of play that is being just completely shattered. I feel like even if things weren't as uncertain these past 10 years, 20 years, it did feel certain, right? It felt like, okay, yeah, if just like how you were mentioning getting the computer science degree, okay, I'm set. Like a decision you might make, you could actually bear the fruits for maybe the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Now it feels like, oh, like things could change tomorrow, and then it could change again, and it could change again. And I think what that does is creates a lot of distress for a lot of people who are used to operating in certain, like under certainty and in sure conditions. And it's just like, training, like when you're under stress, when you are moving and you have more load or more intensity, like it is going to be harder for you to tap into that performance, right? It takes a little bit more work. And so I'm curious how you suggest people deal with that, because it's almost like the fear of uncertainty and the panic that can come from all of this sometimes can, cause us to like not toy around with any of this, or not make the right decision, or make a decision out of fear. So how do you recommend kind of combating against the uncertainty to some extent? as much as we can?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So I think one is we have to anticipate and make a mental shift into expecting this constant change,
Mm,
right? That's I think like step one is just understanding that we're in a new era now, and the rate of change is continually accelerating. It is not decelerating at all. It is continually accelerating, right? And so that does bring about a sense of uncertainty because the way in which you navigated the world, your career, whatever it is, the old I would say the old rules don't fully apply in the new world. The old principles still apply,
mm,
right? Like the principles, the mental models, like those things still kind of port over. And there is this sense of anxiety around like, oh, is AI going to take my job? Like everybody's anxious about it. I'm anxious about it, right? Like the first time I used the O3 model to like work on a strategy problem for my business, and I've done this work for the last decade. I'm intimately familiar with it. I know it would have taken me, several days to solve that problem, and it was done in like minutes, right? And I was like, whoa, like this thing's gonna take my job. Uh, you kind of have that moment of anxiety, and then you push through that, right? And you come to the other side, and you're like, oh, actually, like I still need to know like what questions to ask, what frameworks to apply. Like all that knowledge is still like super valuable. I can just operate at much greater speed now. And my range of capabilities is increasing, right? And so kind of coming back to like how can we use AI to help us navigate some of this uncertainty? So, one of the ways in which, in innovation, when you're kind of thinking about new products, new experiences, things like that, like one of the ways in which you reduce risk and you reduce uncertainty is rapid experimentation, right? And so it's like you create quick. This is something that is core to IDEO's methodology. It was something that I really embodied during my time there. Is the ability to build like quick little prototypes to test things out. So you don't have to spend a ton of time trying to think about like what is the one right best thing. It's like take three different paths, take five different paths, and run quick little tests along multiple different paths to see how things are going to play out. And that's going to give you a real good idea of not only how does this play out now, but like what are the second order consequences, what are the third order consequences of this decision that is significant. And taking it to the world of strategy, this used to be called scenario planning, right? Where it's like, okay, we're building a strategy. A lot of this is like, finger in the wind sort of
yeah.
stuff. And how do we know? We don't know how the conditions are going to change. We don't know what's going to happen 5 years from now. So when you're building a big company strategy, like there's a lot of risk involved. And the way you kind of reduce that risk is through something called scenario planning, which is you create multiple different scenarios, and the conditions like in scenario one might be status quo, nothing is changing here. In scenario two, you might say like, oh, AGI is coming 2 years from now, and what happens when that happens, right? Like let's play that scenario out. Scenario three is like, there's a geopolitical shift that's happening, or tariffs kicking in or something like that. Like how does that scenario play out? And so you play out multiple different scenarios, and that gives you a really good idea of like how this might shift and change with each of these changing variables, and that reduces that uncertainty, it reduces that risk, it helps you understand how to navigate this better. When it happens, you have the kind of fallback plans, you have the contingencies in place, and that's something that AI can do so well. This used to take, you'd have to hire really expensive consultants, pay them several $100s an hour to be able to pull this stuff off, and it would take a while. And now you can do this at rapid scale and rapid speed using AI, right? You don't have to pick three scenarios; you can pick 10. Like it's a machine. It'll run multiple variations quickly.
Totally, yeah. I did stand up comedy for 4 years, and one of the things we used to talk about
Yeah.
is like if you go on stage without writing at all,
Yeah.
right? It's kind of like you might need to bomb 5 times to get to the kernel of the joke, right? But it's
Exactly.
like, why
Exactly.
not do that on the paper 1 or 2 times so that you have some more freedom when you get on stage, versus if you go without anything on stage, now all of a sudden it's taking you much more attempts, right? You're not getting to kind of fail in a way where the stakes aren't high almost. And when it's just pen and paper, the stakes aren't as high as when there's a bunch of people around. So it seems like that's what this is allowing to happen also. I'm curious because you've also experienced, pre-AI, post-AI, right? What do you say is the most like highest leverage habit that you've built that's kind of transformed, I would say, like professionally, right? So the highest leverage habit that has kind of, transformed your professional growth, let's say.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And when I kind of first started out as a solopreneur, one of the things that suddenly disappeared was the accountability, right? Like I didn't have a boss, I didn't have like people to answer to. I mean, sure, I had clients, but that accountability suddenly vanished, and I found myself floundering for a while, right? Like just knowing like what to prioritize, what to work on. Like you have so many options, you have so much freedom. Like it almost was like a bit much, and I signed up for the service called Commit Action, which was incredible, and it was developed by this guy Peter Shellard, who is kind of the shrink for entrepreneurs, if you will, and he kind of developed this like very simple but extraordinarily powerful system, which is called your 3 committed tasks. So every week, I have a planning ritual on Sunday evenings to prepare for the week, and I look at the past week, or look at the past 2 weeks, look at the week ahead, kind of figure out all of the stuff that needs to happen. But I then pick 3 high leverage tasks that is working on the business, not working in the business. So working on the business is things that are, like sales and marketing, anything that's growth related, building systems, building efficiencies, things that allow you to step out of the working in the business to the running of the business, right? And so picking like 3 high leverage intervention tasks that are working on the business, and then putting deep work blocks on the calendar before anything else is scheduled, and doing it at you know at a time when my creativity is at its highest, or like depending on the task. Like there's different times of days that we naturally are inclined to be more creative or more analytical, or eating the frog sort of stuff. So it's kind of calendaring like 90-minute blocks of deep work first, and then those blocks are unmovable, and then the rest of the calendar is totally flexible to work on the working in the business stuff, client work, podcasts, whatever it is. It kind of fills the rest of the calendar, so there's enough flexibility to accommodate everything else, but you kind of make these commitments to yourself, and that just compounds quickly, where you're starting to work on the really important things that matter, and you're solving these kind of big problems, that then kind of just allow you to step out of the constant like feast and famine cycle, and actually like build a business.
I love that. And as we're seeing, AI reshape the workforce, right? I'm curious how you see, like, I mean, I've heard this from a couple people now, where the next $1 billion company is going to be like, it might be one person. Like it might be one person is capable of reaching that scale because the technology that's available now, the access to labor that you have, available, all those things just weren't even on the map before. And so I'm curious, like, how does this shift who will thrive, right? There's been pendulum shifts, I feel, where it's like the people we thought had it set for, the next 40, 50 years, all of a sudden there's this massive disruption, and it's like, oh, actually the people on the opposite end of the spectrum, the artists, the people who have taste, those are the ones that are now kind of in an advantageous position. And it's almost a little mind-boggling to think about. I think Kevin O'Leary was somebody who said this, where he's like, now I'm paying $150,000 a year to videographers and social media people and content. Like, I never saw myself paying for that kind of stuff in the past, but now it's like, it's non-negotiable. I have to do it.
Yeah.
And so I'm
Yeah.
curious, how, like, it doesn't have to be specific job titles, but how do you see with the flux that is in the workforce, like, who will thrive in this new career landscape? Are there some characteristics, traits, or pointers that you can give us on how to prepare for that?
Yeah. So, again, I think like one of the things that, is rapidly declining in value, which is like very painful and difficult even for myself to accept and adapt to, is that the value of expertise is going down, right? And so all of us that have had these, white collar jobs that, it took a while to acquire the skill, and then you had to practice it in the workspace, and you reach a certain level of competence, and people pay you, a lot of money per hour to tap into that expertise. The value of that is like really rapidly plummeting, right? So when you think about doctors, like one of the core aspects of being a good doctor is being able to diagnose what's going on, right? And it's now like fairly well proven that like AI can do an incredible job of diagnosis. It can do probably a better job of reading X-rays than a radiologist, right? So like that sort of specialist skill where you needed to have looked at 10,000 X-rays to be able to like know what's going on, the value of that is like really going down quickly, right? So like doctors, lawyers, consultants like myself, financial analysts, like all of these sorts of roles are evolving quickly, and that value of expertise is going down because the AI knows everything, right? But knowing what questions to ask the AI, knowing what problems to solve, knowing who has this problem, knowing why it would resonate with them, having that sense of taste, having that generalist skill set to be able to put the parts and pieces together, to be able to go from an idea in my head to a rapid test in the market, or being able to put something in somebody's hands and say like, give me feedback on this. Like those skills are just becoming more and more and more important, right? And so that's kind of how I see the landscape shifting. I think like the people that waited for someone to tell them, waiting for their boss to assign work to them, and then kind of do that narrow piece of work, like that stuff is like really at risk now, right? And the person who can figure out what work needs to be done, why it needs to be done, who's good at it, does this go to the AI, does this go to the human, like being able to delegate that appropriately, the people who can set up the systems to say like, okay, hey, this task that is being done, let's take a very very simple example, report, pulling reports. This is something that like every team has to do at some point at some level, and it sucks up so much time, so much mental energy to go find all this information, compile it, structure it, present it in a way that other people can understand, surface the insight. Like that is several hours of work every week for a number of people to do. All that can be automated now, right? And the person who can figure out how to automate that and take, you know, 10, 15 hours of work off of a team that is low level, task level, boring work, those people are going to thrive.
Yeah, it seems like I think Sam Altman was the one also again to say this, but he was talking about how previously like it was important to know all the answers, right? And now it's kind of about who has the right questions, and that's a weird
All about,
yeah, it's a
yeah.
strange pendulum. Like this is another swing of the pendulum, which is hard to wrap your mind around because traditionally you're like, oh, that sounds easy, or that should be like, it's almost, you know what I would describe it as, Danoosh? Like when it was historically like this shift into the technological age made it so that there was a big shift from people that were like lifting heavy things and working with their hands and that kind of a job, and you shifted into like sitting at a desk and working a computer. It was like hard to compute in your mind. Like, what do you mean? Like that, like you're pressing buttons, right? Versus like,
Exactly.
I'm lifting, like, I'm exerting all my will, all my force on these things. How could that possibly be, less valuable than this? It just didn't make sense for a while. And it feels like this is another version of that happening where it's hard to make sense of because it is strange, but it's also how it is in a lot of ways too.
Yeah, and to your point, like, we've been here before, right? Like as a
Yeah.
species, we've been here before. And exactly like kind of running with the same example you laid out, like, at some point we were farm workers and then we became factory workers and then we figured out like how do we build a machine to do the packaging and get ourselves out of that equation. Then how do we do that at scale? And like it's the same continuation that's going on. And I firmly believe that everyone's going to adapt into this new era. I think that the challenging part this time is that we have less time to adapt than we've had with previous revolutions.
Yeah, you're right. It's moving so quickly that it's kind of like you have to one grapple with what's happening and then you have to act as quickly as you can, because even if the previous model isn't true where like it takes 4 years to 4 to 8 years to learn something new and get well versed at it, it does take some time to become well versed in something. And so the sooner that you can begin that, it seems like, even if it's just hints of beginning to build a new skill or a new sub skill, the better off you'll be, it sounds like.
Absolutely. And like one of my favorite little like hacks to do this is using like one of ChatGPT's almost hidden features at this point that like many people don't even know about, which is you can get it to like pepper you little bits of information uh, at like almost at a continuous drip. So, a really good example of this is it used to be called ChatGPT Tips, and then they just kind of like worked it into like the O3 model, and some of the other models as well. And what it is you can kind of go through this brainstorming process with Chat, and then you get to a point and you're like, okay, I need this information on a regular basis, and then you can just say like, hey, I want you to like send me a bite-sized nugget about X, Y, and Z every Monday at 9 a.m. or every day at 9 a.m. Whatever it is. And you can set that schedule and it kind of drips information to you at a steady pace. And like one that I used, I started experimenting with this when it first came out, and I still have this thing going because it's so valuable. Is like, I was like, ChatGPT, tell me how I can use ChatGPT better in my life and work, and send me like 3 tips every morning at 6:30 a.m. when I'm brushing my teeth. And it's kind of like a habit that I built in, and it's been giving me like better and better suggestions because it starts to like it's now incorporating memory and it's starting to understand like what I'm working on, and it's starting to give me more and more useful tips for how I can use ChatGPT. And it's sometimes I haven't even thought about that, but like seeing that little bit of information, that little nugget come through every morning, and that's just enough information that sparks a new idea or gives me something to apply that day or that week, that can be quite transformative.
Yeah, I think it seems like the revolutionary shifts in this are with very small features. Like, do you remember
Yeah.
when ChatGPT couldn't connect to the internet and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden it could,
Oh my
and it was
God.
like,
Yeah.
whoa. And now, we
That
got,
was a huge,
it was,
huge, huge change because suddenly it went from like this static information to like dynamic information. Like you get real time information, you can get, stock prices and things like that as part of your ChatGPT usage, which you couldn't before.
totally, yeah. And I feel like memory is another version of those, right? So it's like, as you see, like it has more and more context the more that you give it. It's almost like, I wonder if eventually there will be some like 2 terabyte plan that ChatGPT offers, so that like you have another brain that's stored separately and like it has access
Totally.
to everything. It seems it's a very exciting time. I appreciate you taking the time to come on. I'm curious what would you leave listeners with today that they can go experiment with and put some of the things that you mentioned today into practice.
That's a really good question. I think I'll share like some advice that I tend to give a lot of my students, in our last class, which is instead of using ChatGPT incrementally for like, help me summarize my email, or help me analyze this data set, actually think about like a real problem that in your life, in your work, whatever it is, whether it's your life, work, doesn't really matter, but it's something that is a real pressing problem. And if you could solve this problem, things would get materially better for you or easier for you. And set a 90-minute timer. Think about like, what are you going to walk away with? What is the piece of paper that you're going to be able to hold at the end of this 90-minute session? What's almost like a deliverable coming out of this? And then pour yourself something nice to drink, whatever that might be, and start with just go to the voice mode and just talk out. Just do a brain dump of whatever's swirling in your head. It doesn't need to be structured. It doesn't need to be well thought out. You can have a conversation with chat. You can ask it to ask you questions. Just start as if you're talking to your really smart friend. And what you're actually doing is you're dumping a ton of context by doing that. And then you can ask it to structure your thinking, analyze the patterns in the conversation, turn it into a structured outline. You can do those sorts of things as step two, and then just kind of let it rip. Like, just go on a 90-minute collaboration. You'll be shocked at like how fast you can make progress on whatever this thing is that's been kind of gnawing at you for a long time. And you can make a lot of progress in 90 minutes, or at least like you'll see a clear path forward when previously like it was just fog.
I really like that. I feel like it can be hard to look externally sometimes and go, oh, what problem do I want to solve? But when you kind of look at very tiny, tiny things day to day that are going on, it may not be worthy of a whole app or a whole business or something. But I find that like the moments that you're feeling like something's missing, like I'm missing a piece of information, or like something's missing from me taking the next step, it's almost like developing the practice to ask yourself, what is that, right? Similar to like if it's, let's say it's with meal prep or food related stuff. Okay. Like instead of wondering, oh man, what am I going to get at the grocery store? If that's the thing that's kind of overwhelming you, go into it and go, hey, give me 5 possible grocery lists for this, this, and that. And it
Yeah,
almost
you start saying like,
evaporates.
hey, here are my health goals or my fitness
Yeah.
goals. Here's what I'm trying to achieve. Here's, this meal prep stuff has been getting in my way. I know these are the things that I need to be doing. I'm struggling with doing them. I need help with figuring out how to do it effectively. Give me like 5 starting ideas for different meals, and then you kind of just go into an iterative collaboration all the way down to you have a shopping list, right? You can just plug into Instacart and you're done. And you can do that like so fast. And this thing that was an annoying problem in your life on a continual basis, like you now have a solution for. And then how do you take the next step? And okay, like you found the solution one time, how do you turn this into a repeatable process that you can offload to AI, right? And now you don't have to worry about this anymore. The AI is going to figure it all out and give you the list. And at some point, you can take it all the way to like plugging it into Instacart and it's arrived at your door.
Right. It's
And then you
literally,
save so much time and hassle. And like now you have all of the things you need to be healthy.
yeah, it's kind of creating more space in your brain by doing some of this stuff, because there is just a lot of like you don't realize how much is still monotonous and repeatable until you start
Yeah.
actually analyzing it. But even if it's 5 minutes at a time, 30 minutes at a time, I mean, that is valuable time that you get back, which can be put towards other stuff. So
Yeah, and offloading the low level, task level decisions quickly to the AI, like, what should I eat for dinner? What should I wear to this event? Like, those are the things they actually like consume a lot of mental space. And like once you learn how to offload that sort of stuff to the AI quickly, that frees up not just time, but like mental capacity to work on bigger, higher order, more creative, more strategic work, right? And I think that's the real linchpin to like riding this wave.
I think that's the real win. You're right, because it's like, how they say 4 hours a day or whatever the number is that you're actually, productive or sharp or thinking. It's like, okay, an hour of that may have been taken up before by like being on the phone with customer service and looking up certain things and getting the right
Yeah.
information. And it's like, all of a sudden your brain is zapped after an hour long,
Yep.
thing, like dealing with that. It's like you're removing those one by one so you can get the most out of your 4 hours or whatever.
Yep.
Amazing.
Exactly.
Well, Danoosh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you on. Where can people support your work and follow you? I know you do a lot on LinkedIn. Tell us
Yeah,
where we can
LinkedIn is the
support you.
best place to connect with me. I'll drop a link that you can put in the show notes. But yeah, thanks for having me on. This was really fun. It was a really interesting, fun conversation, and I hope that listeners take away some useful tidbits here.
Absolutely. And I'm sure we'll catch up with you again, maybe when things are very drastic in the landscape. We'll touch base again. But thank you for coming on, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Misbah.